From Washington to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, I'm Kevin Cirilli.
And from New York, I'm Taylor Riggs. Welcome to Balance of Power, where the world of politics meets the world of business. And Kevin, that world of business is high and mighty today. Joining us now on the markets is Abigail Doolittle. Abigail, walk us through what is going on in the markets. Last night after the bell, we got those big tech earnings, and those gains continue today, Abigail.
They do continue, but it's pretty interesting because at this point, Taylor, we're looking at mixed markets. So as you mentioned yesterday, Apple, Amazon, Facebook putting up huge quarters for the June quarter, stocks surging. That's still the case today for those stocks. But we do have mixed markets. The NASDAQ 100 is up sharply, being helped out by the weighting there of more than 30% or roughly 30% weighting to those three stocks. On the other hand, you have the S&P 500 and the Dow down. The S&P 500 slightly, the Dow more so. But where we have real weakness, the Russell 2000 down 2.2%. This as the Haven yen is up 1%. Its best day in 2 months. So this may suggest, Taylor, that despite the fact that we have those huge gains for the mega cap stocks, there's uncertainty weighing, of course, from whether or not there will be fiscal stimulus from D.C. Other earnings reports, the big oil is doing pretty poorly. Not a lot of cyclical bullishness at this moment. So there are concerns showing through that Haven yen getting such a big bid on the day, again, despite the big tech strength.
Well, and Abigail, when you talk about that big tech strength, it really is exacerbating the trend that we've already seen underway between the winners and the losers. How is that now faring as the winners just continue to extend those gains?
Well, you know, on a year-to-date basis, it really shows very clearly, Taylor, because on a year-to-date basis, Apple is up more than 30% as a sign of the winners. On the other hand, Chevron, which also reported today, down more than 30%. But if we were to take a look at this relative to the S&P 500, we are going to see that on the year, Apple and Amazon up in a huge way. So again, those winners. On the other hand, the S&P 500 basically flat, and then that S&P 500 equal weighted index, it's actually down almost 9%. So this is the tale of two stories relative to stocks around 2020, the pandemic, the haves, the have-nots, the winners and the losers. It's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. Net right now, the S&P 500 is flat, but if you equal it out for those big tech, kind of equal out that weighting, you actually have that S&P 500 down. So it'll be interesting to see how all of that plays out.
All right, thank you to Abigail. And not just traders who want to know what's happening in Washington, D.C. with the economic stimulus, but mayors around the country who are saying they need more cash in order to deal with the economic effects of the virus. Joining us now is one of those mayors, Steve Adler. He's the Democratic mayor of Austin, Texas. Mayor Adler, thank you for joining us. How crucial is it that states and local municipalities around the country get access to capital in this next round of stimulus?
It's real important. You know, Austin right now is dealing with huge issues, especially in the hospitality industry. Hotels, restaurants, bars, obviously not open. Retail. We have a lot of people that are out of work. We're looking at unemployment compensation payments that are stopping. We're looking at tenants that are scared to death of being evicted. Landlords that are not getting rent to pay their mortgages. We need federal assistance.
So what have you been advising some of your constituents, Mayor, with regards to benefits set to expire in just a couple of hours?
Nothing I can tell them is particularly satisfying. You know, we're leaning on our congressional delegations as much as we can to step in and help. But I'm real concerned about the tsunami that we're going to face if there's not relief. The jobs just aren't there. You know, we're on a trajectory with this virus that was going to lead us to overwhelm our ICUs. The community did what we asked them to do 4 weeks ago, but all the things we asked them to do, which brought down this trajectory that we're on, are things that are not friendly to opening up businesses and people gathering. So there's a forced choice, which is why the federal government has to step in.
Mayor, what budget deficit are you now facing as you're taking a look at declining revenue and then any now expenses that you may have to cut?
You know, it's been forecast that in this fiscal year we'll be down probably about $50 million, $40 to $50 million, and then into next year, depending on the assumptions that you make, an additional $25 million.
I'm curious if you're tapping the bond markets to close that deficit, or if you're also taking advantage of that federal municipal liquidity facility program that was also extended by the Federal Reserve. Which to you looks more attractive?
You know, I don't know the answer to that question. You know, we have some real good finance people, and I just know we're leaning on them to handle this in the way that's most efficient and gives us the best return.
You know, but sticking with that conversation what Taylor just brought up, I mean, the political debate here in Washington, D.C., Mayor Adler, and you know this, is Republicans are saying, why should they be on the hook? Why should conservative taxpayers be on the hook in other states where the budget is balanced or where they have a better financial picture to bail out cities and states that aren't, from their perspective, as fiscally responsible?
Well, I don't think that that's the right paradigm. You know, in Austin, we have real conservative reserve policies. The reserves we had on hand exceeded our reserve policies. We have a AAA rating as a city. We've been able to go through this crisis without having to furlough or lay off people. But we need assistance because of things that go well beyond our control in our community. Too many people, we don't have the capacity to pay the unemployment compensation. We don't have the capacity to pay everyone's rent that are out of work. We were fiscally and continue to be fiscally conservative in the policies that we have, but this is a crisis and that is bigger than we are. And we also have an opportunity at this point to really exit this virus in a much stronger place than we entered into it. If we use this opportunity, people being out of work to train, for example, it would be helpful.
Mayor Adler, President Trump was in your state of Texas earlier this week. Do you think Texas has any chance of going blue for Biden this November?
I think it will go blue for Biden in November. You know, we just went through an election here a week or so ago. It was a runoff election, usually a low turnout election. And everyone was shocked with the number of people that were voting. 40% of the people that voted were under 40 years old. That's never happened here before. So I think it's a new electorate. I think it's an involved and electorate, and I think it's going to change not only that presidential race, but I think it's going to change control of the House here in the state legislature.
Mayor, I want to talk quickly about some of the rising cases that we're seeing in your Texas. What are small businesses telling you about wanting to reopen to get some of that revenue back, to get some of those customers back, but then also now having to perhaps shut down given rising COVID cases?
Well, the conversation that we've had in our community is that the best way to be able to open up businesses, the best way to be able to open up schools and sustain the opening of both is to drive down the overall virus load in our city. And here in Austin, we've worked with the businesses, with the chamber to really push the adoption and wearing of masks universally and doing social distancing. And when you have a common message like that, the adoption rate's a lot higher. So even though we're the fourth largest city in Texas, I think we were ranked just here recently 15th in terms of the number of cases we have per 100,000 population. We're driving down that virus load to put us in a position where we're going to be able to do things that only come with that. So you first have to take care of the health, and we've had a business community that's been united behind that. What we're focused right now on is figuring out what we do with the schools.
All right, our thanks to Steve Adler, the mayor of Austin, Texas. And coming up on part of my conversation with Biden for President's senior advisor, Tony Blinken, what he says about the state of the U.S.-China relations and how a new administration might handle the mounting tensions. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and Radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm Kevin Cirilli in Washington.
And I'm Taylor Riggs in New York. And Kevin, we are now going to get an update on the headlines making some news. And for that, we go to Mark Crumpton.
Taylor, Kevin, thank you. The Senate has left Washington for the weekend with no deal in sight on a new stimulus package. The supplemental $600 a week unemployment insurance payments come to an end today. Republicans want a temporary extension of the jobless benefits, but Democrats say they want those payments to be part of a much larger bill. The White House says it's made 4 offers, but the Democrats haven't made any counter offers. President Trump's coming under pressure to set a national strategy for the coronavirus. The White House has largely avoided strict rules on a master plan. That's left many of the decisions to industry or state leaders. Experts say that's made shortages of protective gear at hospitals worse, and it could complicate distribution of vaccines. The British Prime Minister Boris Johnson's delaying some measures aimed at easing the coronavirus lockdown. That's because the number of new cases is rising for the first time since May. The British government has scrapped plans to allow places like casinos, skating rinks, and bowling alleys to reopen. The new measures will be reviewed after 2 weeks. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in over 120 countries. I'm Mark Crumpton. This is Bloomberg. Taylor?
Thank you, Mark. I now want to turn to another big story that we're following today. Hong Kong Chief Executive Carrie Lam speaking after delaying September's key Legislative Council election for 1 year due to the coronavirus, fueling more outrage among the city's opposition. And for more, we're joined by Bloomberg's Chief North Asia correspondent, Stephen Engel, who has stayed up until midnight Hong Kong time to join us. So, Stephen, we're so grateful for your time. Curious what the level of exhaustion and frustration is on the ground there in Hong Kong.
Well, I think among the pro-democracy camp, they're absolutely frustrated, obviously. Keep in mind, a year ago, the chief executive, Carrie Lam, was on her back heels a bit, with millions taking to the streets and demonstrating for more rights and scrapping of that extradition bill. And that led to overwhelming victory for the pro-democracy camp in district council elections last November. Wow, what a difference a year makes, and also what a difference the backing of Beijing has given Carrie Lam, because a year later, Carrie Lam is quite forceful and basically today postponing those legislative council elections, which the pro-democracy camp had high hopes of having a similar kind of victory like they had in district council elections last November. But that is all for naught now, because they're going to be postponed for a year, and it comes within 24 hours as well as 12 legislative council pro-democracy candidates were disqualified for various reasons, including not supporting that very controversial national security law. So big power play by Carrie Lam today.
All right, Stephen Engel. Our thanks to the indefatigable Bloomberg's Stephen Engel. Now go get some rest. And be sure to catch Bloomberg TV's 1 hour special, Hong Kong on Edge, at 7 p.m. tonight in New York and airing again throughout the weekend. And now, sticking with China, I spoke earlier today with Tony Blinken. He is Biden for President Senior Policy Advisor, as well as the former National Security Advisor under President Obama, about just how a new administration might handle the mounting tensions between the world's 2 largest economies.
Right now, by every key metric, China's strategic position is stronger and ours is weaker as a result of the president's leadership. Think about it this way. President Trump has helped China advance its own key strategic goals, weakening American alliances, check. Leaving a vacuum in the world for China to fill, check. Abandoning our own values and giving Beijing a green light to trample on human rights and democracy in places like Xinjiang or in Hong Kong, check. And then maybe worst of all, debasing our own democracy by attacking its institutions, its people, its values every single day, and so reducing its appeal compared to China. That's what I call checkmate. So the real challenge, Kevin, is that we have to put ourselves in a position of strength. And ultimately, it's about us. It's about making sure that we renew our own democracy, that we invest in our own workers, that we actually revive our partnerships, and that we put our values front and center. If we do that, then we can engage China from a position of strength, and that's what Joe Biden would do as president.
Let me follow up on that because Republicans in the Trump administration argue that the level of unpredictability and the isolationist foreign policy strategy has enabled the United States to take more of a brash tone against Beijing. However, what I'm hearing from you is that ultimately for the American worker, the strengthening of the alliance is actually going to be more beneficial in the long run. You know this. Across the country, people are incredibly skeptical of China stealing their jobs.
Yeah.
So from an economic perspective, how come strengthening alliances would be better protect American jobs?
Because when we're actually engaging China to curb some of its practices that we profoundly object to, other countries are in the same situation. And if we're working alone to try to press China to change its ways, we're about 25% of the world's GDP. If we're actually acting with other democracies who are similarly aggrieved, that's 50 or 60% of the world's GDP. That's a lot harder for China to ignore. But instead of doing that, President Trump has actually alienated the very partners we would want with us to deal with China. He's launched tariff wars against them. The French president at one point, Macron, went to President Trump and said, you know, we should work on China together. We have the same kinds of problems. And President Trump apparently turned to him and said, why would I work with you? The EU is even worse than China.
Well, to that point precisely, as it relates to technology with Europe and 5G and their weighing of utilizing Huawei, for example, from a national security perspective, how would building a broader technology coalition with U.S. allies work to diminish some of the advances that Xi Jinping has been able to make on the technological front?
Well, this is interesting because if you think about it, the world increasingly is divided between techno-democracies on the one hand and techno-autocracies on the other hand. If the techno-democracies can come together and work together to write the rules, to shape the norms, to build the institutions through which technology is going to be used and governed, and if they can infuse their values into the technology to the extent technology has values, we'll be in a much better place to make sure that the technology that dominates our lives is used in a good way, not a bad way. The problem is the techno-democracies aren't well organized. They aren't working well together. And largely, that's because the United States has pulled back and pulled out. Or when it is engaged, it tries to browbeat other countries into doing what we want instead of working with them, finding a common way forward.
You mentioned Hong Kong, and in particular, obviously, China has taken a much more aggressive approach regarding Hong Kong. How would a Biden administration handle that aggression in what is an important symbol of democracy, but also, of course, a financial hub?
So the first thing to do is to make sure that if you're president of the United States, you're not giving China a green light to crack down on democracy in Hong Kong. Remember, a year ago, when the protests were kicking up again because of this increasing crackdown on democracy, President Trump said, I stand with President Xi Jinping. That is a huge signal of impunity to Beijing that it can proceed without fearing repercussions. So the first thing to do is to have a president who's not going to greenlight a crackdown on democracy. I think at this point, unfortunately, we have to recognize the reality and no longer treat Hong Kong with the fiction that it's autonomous. And we need to work on deterring further crackdowns, hopefully incentivizing international companies to leave. We can't let, in effect, Beijing eliminate what it doesn't like in Hong Kong, which is political freedom, but keep what it does, this large international corporate presence. So, you know, there are lots of things that one could do, one could look at in terms of Hong Kong's role in international organizations and maybe pulling them out of those organizations, actively supporting the relocation of U.S. businesses and also helping Hong Kong residents who want to leave come to the United States as the UK is doing, and then step up defenses of Taiwan's democracy by exposing Beijing's efforts to interfere.
That was part of my Zoom interview with Biden foreign policy advisor and former deputy national security advisor Tony Blinken. More Balance of Power is next. This is Bloomberg. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm Kevin Cirilli in Washington.
And I'm Taylor Riggs in New York. And Kevin, we want to turn now to our stock of the hour. It is all about oil companies. They're losing billions on a 1-2 punch of both oversupply and pandemic demand drops. Both ExxonMobil and Chevron earnings, well, they reflect that. Our own Scarlett Fu is here with more. Scarlett, what were some of your key takeaways around some of these oil giants reporting and just the losses that they are reporting?
Yeah, it was a pretty ugly day for big oil. You know, there was a time when ExxonMobil was the most valuable company in the S&P 500. Those days are long gone. And if you look at ExxonMobil today and its market cap, it is worth 1/10 of what Apple is worth. And I bring this up because both Apple and ExxonMobil reported earnings over the last 24 hours. And ExxonMobil's results look very different from what we heard from Apple. Okay, so ExxonMobil and Chevron, they both have this integrated business model that is meant to protect them no matter if oil prices rise or fall. So that means for the upstream business, they have oil exploration and production. They also have a downstream side of the business, which is refining and chemical units. In the second quarter, however, you can see production got hit because of lower oil prices. And the refining and chemical units also got hit because of lower demand for things like jet fuel, gasoline, and plastic wrap that uses oil as a raw material. And in fact, this is stunning. ExxonMobil generated zero cash from operating activities in the second quarter. This is a massive company, and it generated zero cash from its operating activities. All of that resulting in some pretty steep losses. ExxonMobil a $610 million loss in the first quarter, an even bigger loss in the second quarter. There were $1.1 billion. Look at Chevron's numbers, $8.3 billion deficit in the second quarter. That is 2 times the amount it made in the year-ago period. And by the way, Chevron also wrote down a lot of its assets, $5.7 billion in oil and gas assets. I mean, these numbers are so big, I had to look at it a couple of times, 3 or 4 times, Kevin.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, it really is staggering, Scarlett, just when you actually see that data flow. And our thanks to Bloomberg's Scarlett Fu, who, of course, has been all over this. And
you know, Kevin, I'm going to jump in here because I want to keep Scarlett Fu because she kills it every Wednesday when we have a Fed Day. Scarlett, I'm so curious about your takeaway from your big interview with Scott Minerd on Fed Day. And then, of course, you're anchoring radio this week. So you're also very acutely aware of what's going on in big tech world and the big four and those blowout earnings. What has been some of your key takeaways for this week?
You know, when we were going through the earnings yesterday from the big four companies, what really got my attention, of course, was Apple and the 4-for-1 stock split. It's a really interesting decision given that so many companies don't seem to care how much their stock is in terms of the price tag at the moment, because passive investments have made it so that retail investors don't actually buy individual stocks, right? They get exposure to the stock market through ETFs, through index funds. Yet you have Apple consciously reducing its value of its share price, perhaps to make it more accessible. So a 4-for-1 stock split, when the stock was trading at $400, brings it back down to about $100. That makes it, again, a little bit more accessible for retail investors.
Yeah, well, our thank you is always there to Scarlett Fu. Kevin, I'm on commercial breaks. We're going to be trading on our Robinhood accounts with those retail stocks.
Absolutely. And coming up next, much more Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and Radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm Kevin Cirilli in Washington.
And I'm Taylor Riggs in New York. And Kevin, we have to stay on the markets, particularly after a day like today when we had those big tech earnings, really trying to see if the NASDAQ 100 can hold on to those gains. They're only up about half of what they were earlier, but we're still up about 0.5%. All of this comes as you're finally getting some strength in that Bloomberg dollar index. So, Kevin, we should note we're still near the lows that we are back since 2018. Interestingly enough, Kevin, as we're looking at the markets, we're taking a look at shares of General Motors as well, because we're getting some headlines here that they are moving to build their nationwide electric vehicle charging network. I really wonder how much of this is to try to keep up with Tesla. So we know that General Motors here is working with electric vehicle charging operator EVgo to build a nationwide fast charging infrastructure. This is all as the automaker prepares for a major push into battery-powered models. Stay with us, of course, because General Motors President Mark Reuss will be with us just in a few moments, of course, sitting down with our own David Westin. So, Kevin, certainly some interesting news here coming out from General Motors in the EV space.
It really is going to be remarkable, and you can stay tuned for that interview that David Westin conducted. The Trump administration, meanwhile, is set to provide as much as $2.1 billion to COVID-19 vaccine partners, and it's the biggest U.S. investment yet in fast-tracking shots as well as snapping up supplies. For more now, we are joined by Leon Panetta, chairman of the Panetta Institute for Public Policy. He is also, of course, the former U.S. Secretary of Defense, former CIA director, and former White House Chief of Staff under President Clinton. Secretary Panetta, it's great to have you here. What are you going to be looking for to make sure that the public-private partnership for executing vaccines once we get one is enacted in an efficient and equal way?
Well, I think the key is going to be whether or not the federal government really does provide some kind of national strategy to back up the money they're providing now. I think they've got to put together a strategy that makes clear that as these vaccines are developed, that there is a strategy for being able to deploy these vaccines to the country and, for that matter, to the world. This is going to be a huge task. So first job is try to get the vaccine, but the second job is develop a national strategy as to how you're going to implement that.
So let me follow up on that point, because right now, as scientists are racing to find a vaccination cure for this, the work is being done behind the scenes in government at both the top level and the bureaucratic level in order to efficiently create this system. What should they be doing to make sure that once there is a vaccine, that it can be executed?
Well, I think it's very important now that, and I hope that Dr. Fauci and others are obviously doing this, but I think it's very important to keep track of just exactly how many are in the game and how many are working towards a vaccine, and be able to have regular reports on progress being made. I think because of federal money being invested, because of the national importance of dealing with this issue, I think that the government has to keep track of whether or not progress is being made and how fast it's being made. That's kind of number one. Number two, I think it's very important to focus on just exactly how do we implement the distribution of this vaccine in a fair way. I mean, do we focus on healthcare workers first? Do we focus on those states that are in trouble? What's the priority list for how you would apply that vaccine? I don't know that if any work has been done on that aspect, but I think serious attention needs to be given to just exactly how do we apply this vaccine? Do we do it in a fair way? And what are the priorities that are important for the country?
Leon, when we talk about priorities for the country, so often in history books, you talk about in times of wartime, you really ramp up domestic production, not only of the production and distribution of vaccines, but PPE equipment, making sure that Americans are producing their own stuff so that we have enough of it. Are we doing enough on that front?
I don't believe so. I think the problem is that, initially the president did describe this as a war. I think he was right. It is a war. We've lost over 150,000 Americans as a result of this war. But there's a real sense that we're losing that war right now. And for that reason, I think, it is very important for the president to understand that, he can't just heckle the process. He is the president of the United States, and he should be developing a clear strategy that will back up those in the healthcare arena so that they have what they need in order to do this. He should have implemented the Defense Production Act a long time ago, providing the testing, providing the tracing, providing all of the necessary assistance that is required by all of the states in dealing with this pandemic. Instead, I've just had the feeling that he's kind of backed away from really exercising the kind of strong leadership that should have been exercised in facing a major crisis.
Leon, I think that cities and states across this country are also facing another crisis, not only as it comes to rising COVID cases, but then, of course, with protests and trying to deal with police reform and having respect for Black Lives Matter, but then also having a fair look as well at some of the police officers and the police forces on the ground. How are you balancing the two? What do you think is the right strategy for local police officers?
Well, there's no question this is a tricky time trying to balance all of these different needs. But the key is to work together. That I think has been the basic formula for how our democracy has survived, is because we've been willing to work together towards a common goal. And in this situation, I think it's important for the federal government not to kind of impose itself, but to develop a partnership with state and local government with regards to how do we best try to obviously maintain law and order, but at the same time, try to implement some of the reforms that are necessary in order to meet all of the criticisms that have been raised as a result of what we've seen on racial inequality in this country. I don't think it's a matter of having to make a choice between one or the other. I think it really is the ability to kind of sit down and work together to be able to address these issues. That's what's needed now more than ever.
Secretary Panetta, earlier I spoke with Tony Blinken, who, of course, is a former Deputy National Security Advisor in the Obama administration and now a senior advisor for the Biden campaign on foreign policy issues. I spoke with him a lot about China, but I want to get your reaction to something that President Trump said and conducted earlier this week, and that's with troop withdrawal with regards to Germany. Thousands of U.S. troops, the president has said, should come home or be relocated to other parts around the world. Is that a smart foreign policy decision, and what does it mean for the Western alliance?
Well, I'm very concerned by that decision. I'm more concerned, frankly, about the way this president is dealing with Vladimir Putin and his inability to confront Putin on major issues that that Russia is implementing in order to undermine our country. I mean, we can't lose sight of the fact that Russia's primary goal, and Putin, as a former KGB agent, his primary goal is to undermine the United States of America, to weaken us, to weaken our institutions. And yet, not having the president address these issues, whether it's what they're trying to do to interfere with our elections, whether it's the idea that they would be providing bounties on men and women in uniform out in the field, or whether it's now the president deciding to withdraw troops from the NATO region, all of that is a gift to Putin. The message going to Putin is that the United States is weak. And that really concerns me, because it basically is saying to Putin, go ahead and take advantage of this situation. That's why they went into the Crimea. That's why they went into Syria. That's why they're conducting election interference in this country. That's why they're doing what they're doing, is because they don't feel that anybody is going to check them. And so the problem right now is the failure of this president to be strong in dealing with Putin and letting him know where the lines are.
I wish we had more time. Our thanks to Leon Panetta, chairman of the Panetta Institute for Public Policy, as well as a host of different titles that he served in previously. For Bloomberg First Word News now, we go to Mark Crumpton. Mark?
Kevin, thank you very much. New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio says the largest U.S. school system remains on track for in-person learning this September, but it will shut down if the citywide infection rate hits 3% or higher. New York City's rate has been 2% and below for the past several weeks, giving city health and school officials confidence that the system can sustain in-class instruction.
We know we can do it, but I want to hold that very tough standard, because I want to keep us all focused on what we have to do to keep safety first. And this is a way of proving that we will do things the right way, setting a very tough bar, but also one I am convinced we can achieve.
And Mayor de Blasio vowed that individual schools would remain vigilant with the expectation that classrooms will have to be closed when a student or a teacher tests positive for the coronavirus. China's economy speeded up this month. The first official gauge of growth in the second half shows factory output recovering. Meanwhile, the non-manufacturing index dropped slightly, but construction is booming. Economists have revised upward their forecast for full-year growth. They now see China's economy expanding 2% this year. The British Prime Minister Boris Johnson is delaying some measures aimed at easing the coronavirus lockdown. That's because the number of new cases is rising for the first time since May. The British government has scrapped plans to allow places like casinos, skating rinks, and bowling alleys to reopen. The new measures will be reviewed after 2 weeks. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in over 120 countries. I'm Mark Crumpton. This is Bloomberg. Kevin?
Thank you, Mark. And coming up, we'll hear from GM's president next as the company announces a major expansion of its electric vehicle charging network. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
General Motors teaming up with EVgo to build a nationwide fast charging network for electric vehicles. Balance of Power anchor David Weston spoke to GM President Mark Reuss about it just a short time ago.
This actually gets to the physical piece of putting really good charging infrastructure in with a company that is the largest DC fast charge company and network in the United States, EVgo. So today we're announcing that we're going to put about 2,700 new charging stations across the United States that are the level 2 DC fast charge networks. It'll triple the amount of EVgo charging stations in the United States. And so we're very excited about it. It's a huge first step, actually a second and third step for the charging network to put in place for electric vehicles in the United States.
So, Mark, you mentioned DC fast charge. For those of us who are not that familiar with exactly how this charging goes, what does that mean, DC fast charge?
Well, it's sort of the next phase, David, in how fast you can charge your vehicle, very simply. And so you can get most vehicles will be able to get about 80% of a full charge to their pack in a vehicle in less than 30 minutes. So if you think about that, where we'd like to place these and where we will place them with EVgo's help, will be places where you may be visiting and doing actual things like grocery shopping and other visits to stores, where you'll be able to really get most of your car charged in less than 30 minutes. So it's a big step.
So when I go into Whole Foods or something like that, and I'm going to go shopping for half an hour, I charge my, let's say it's a Cadillac Lyriq, the car you're about to announce, right? I charge it. How do I pay for it? How much does it cost me?
Yeah, well, you can be part of the network, or you can actually pay for it right there. And it's between $7 and $12 to do something from zero charge, near zero charge in a car to over 80%. So it's really a cost-effective way to put energy and provide energy for your battery packs in your electric vehicle.
So to be clear, at this point at least, things could change. It's not so much that this is a business in and of itself for General Motors, but it really fuels your EV business. You make the money off the cars.
That's right. That's exactly right. And by the way, the energy source for the EVgo charge network is 100% renewable. So that's a powerful thought when you think about that. And that's why we're proud to partner with EVgo and their mission and their vision, because it's very compatible with General Motors.
You mentioned earlier it's ubiquitous. How ubiquitous is it? I mean, obviously it's going to service General Motors cars as you roll out your electric vehicles. What other cars will it service? Will it service Nissan Leafs? Will it service Teslas?
The Tesla piece of it is different. They made a decision on their fast charge network to do something different from a connection standpoint. So that will not be, that was their decision. But, the plugs and the connections are, generally speaking, an SAE, Society of Automotive Engineering type standard. And so for lots of other manufacturers and charging, it's kind of the rest, right? So it's quite large.
There was a poll done a year or two ago by Harris that said that lack of charging stations was the #1 reason people were giving for not buying EVs. How far will this move with that you're making today, how far will it go to alleviate that bottleneck?
Certainly the charging infrastructure is #1 or close to the top of that. The other one is actually vehicle range, because there's a lot of folks that may not live in an urban environment, or in an environment that doesn't have the infrastructure, doesn't have the car doesn't have the range. Those two together, plus the cost and price, for electric vehicles in market today, is quite high. And so, we're looking to be the manufacturer that breaks down and takes away those pain points for everybody, to introduce, electric vehicles for everyone, and this charging network is absolutely a key part of that.
EVgo's a private company, General Motors is a private company. Can private sector do this by itself? What assistance do you need from federal government or from state governments?
Well, that's a fantastic question as well. You look at where we're going to put these, and you mentioned it early on. These are going to be places where people go and to do things, to shop, to work, to all those things, and those locations are going to be really helped if we can. And I'd like to put out a call to action for those folks in the municipalities and the communities in those areas to help build out and continue building out the infrastructure that we need for electric vehicles across this country. And I know, and EVgo, by the way, has a great track record of working with these communities and municipalities to do that. And so, that's a big reason we wanted to partner with them, because they've done it and they're very good at it. And, we will take all the help we can get from those sectors to help do this. This is,
does it have to be federal government? Does it have to be state government? Where's it going to come from?
It doesn't have to be any of those one things. I don't think it's going to be any one company, any one of the federal government or the state governments or the communities by themselves. It has to be a coordinated effort and a belief that this is the renewable, sustainable energy to provide the freedom of transportation for the future. And I think if we get that fundamental belief across this country, we can all work together to make it happen. So it's a very powerful thought if you think about that.
Clearly, GM is really planning a dramatic ramp up in electric vehicles. You're starting from a low base, let's be honest, but really a rapid increase is what you're anticipating.
Sure.
Do you see a point in the future where there's a crossover for General Motors where actually you're selling more electric vehicles than internal combustion engines? And when is that?
I can't tell you that because I don't know that, but from a company and business commercial standpoint, General Motors will be very agile in our approach to this. So we're going to provide vehicles that people really have a highly desirable for people at the right price points, with the right design, with the right proprietary battery chemistry and cost and performance. And the customers will lead us to when, we get those volumes and we see that demand happen. But, it's a very large transformation of our company to something that is quite different. And, we've vertically integrated a lot of this technology and commercial know-how. So we feel very good about that. But, for the foreseeable immediate future, we're concentrated on launching our brand new full-size utilities out of Arlington, Texas. And, we're going to be about a week ahead of that schedule. So, we're going to do both here, and it's very exciting.
It's a very big transformation for General Motors and how you manufacture cars. It also potentially is a big transformation for how you're valued on Wall Street. If you look at something like a Tesla and the valuation they have, it is just outrageous, many people think. Is that something that you're mindful of, that if you could become valued as an EV company rather than an internal combustion engine company, you get a much higher valuation?
We're very mindful of that. And there's good basis for growth in this transformation for General Motors. And I think that's key. But, we've been around a long time, our company has. And so we have to, and we will prove our agility and our ability as we pivot from what were internal combustion engines to electric. And, we're focused on proving that and doing what we say we're going to do.
That was GM President Mark Roy speaking with Balance of Power anchor David Weston. This is Bloomberg.
Joe Biden says that he will announce his choice for vice president next week, and I'm lucky enough that Kevin Swirly is here because he knows more about those VP candidates than 3 of me combined. Kevin, what can we look for?
Well, look, I mean, usually when we're covering a VP pick, we're staking out the residence of the candidate. But, the presumptive nominee, Joe Biden, is saying might not be able to actually meet one-on-one with the pick. Or if he does, he's going to have to dupe the media into doing so because of the restrictions on the coronavirus. But look, Senator Kamala Harris is on this short list, Susan Rice, Representative Val Demings, Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer. A lot of different types of options that he could ultimately pick. Now, of course, we're also approaching the 100-year anniversary of women getting the right to vote in America. So that automatically really adds some more intrigue here, as Biden, of course, has said he's going to pick
and it'll be a woman,
candidate.
Right? We think?
It will definitely be a woman. Yeah, he has said that he's going to pick a woman, Taylor. And, he could go to, he could go to try to take a minority route. He could also try to get a battleground route. He could take a more progressive pick like a Senator Elizabeth Warren. The political junkie in me could just keep talking about this forever. But he says he's going to do it in the first week of August. So
that's why you're here.
That's why I'm here. And coming up next on the next hour of Bloomberg Radio, we're going to talk to Richard Trumka. This is Bloomberg.